So one of the things that I've come to realize in my adult life is that perspective is everything. Perspective is everything. One of my mentors, a good friend of mine, tells a story about how he was talking about his triggers. In fact, a lot of stuff that I talk about triggers, I've learned the hard way, but he was talking about his own triggers with me one day, and he said that one of his is when people are discourteous on airplanes. I don't know if you ever fly, but I don't know why we do this. The plane lands, we pull up to the gate, the plane stops, and it makes that little beeping noise, and it's almost like it's off to the races. There's no gate attached yet. There's no ramp. The doors aren't open. There's no way to get off, but everybody on the plane does what? They all stand up, right? It's like, where are you going to go? There's nowhere to go. You can't get your bag. And my mentor tells me that one day he was in the back of the plane, like midway, 5 or 6 rows from the back. And as that little ding happens, there's a teenager that just jets right down the middle of the plane, right? And like everybody's trying to stand up. And so what he realizes is the whole family's trying to do the same thing. So he kind of just steps in the aisle, right? He's like, and they're pushing on him. He's like, look, everybody wants to get off the plane. Just be patient, we'll get there, let these people get their bags. And the person behind him was calling him every name in the book, okay? He said that he was being called things he'd never heard before, things he had to Google when he finally got off the plane. And so he holds the family back, the kid has run off, and then finally it's his turn to kind of get up, and one of the stewardesses comes up to him. He thinks he's done such a great thing. What a hero I am. I've kept people, made them be courteous. And one of the stewardesses comes up to me and goes, sir, I think you'd like to know that child that ran past you had a panic attack, and that was their mom trying to get to them. And I know you can chuckle nervously because that's what he kind of did, and it was like, oh my gosh, I didn't know, right? Perspective is everything. Hindsight helps too, like maybe scheduling Oklahoma for homecoming was a terrible idea. I don't know, perspective. I'm sorry. I told you I'm like the perfect pastor for y'all because I came from Kentucky and I'm used to my football team losing. So if y'all need to talk, I've done it. I've been there. I can live with this with you. It'll be fine. It's going to be okay. Perspective is everything. Let me say it a different way. How you see will determine what you do. Right? I mean, our lens on things, our perspective on things, the way we've decided to think about the circumstances of our lives or the things we're going through, like this is going to determine how we make our decisions. And look, again, I'm going to lay all my cards on the table because I'm a Jesus follower, and I know not everybody in this room probably is, but I am. And so like my decision to follow Jesus, my decision to believe that God is who he says he is and that Jesus is who he says he is, then that's going to shape, I see the world through that lens. And that should determine what I do. Now, it's easy to say, and we know this is true, but the problem that we have oftentimes is sometimes the way we're looking at the world is broken, right? Sometimes the way we're looking at things, we don't have all the information. Sometimes, just like my mentor, you think you're doing the right thing, but you haven't really studied the situation. Or worse, you talk yourself out of doing what you know your lens is telling you should do. You have this perspective, but you question everything, and you feel really insecure about it, and the next thing you know, you've made a decision you know was dumb, but it's almost too late, right? How you see will determine what you do. Now, hold that thought for a minute. We're in a series called Broken and Grateful, and we've been taking hymns that I know I used to sing them when I was a kid. I think many of us grew up singing these songs, and we've been taking songs from way back, from kind of the origins of the church, and revisiting them, not because we just want to make a shift and sing old songs for the heck of it, but because there's some meaning and a story and some significance to our walk with God that we can find in them, right? And again, I've said this each week, but I grew up in a church where they had these this is a Methodist hymnal from the church I grew up in, and this one's all dusty and moldy now at this point, but like they would shout out numbers, you'd open it up, and then you'd start reading. I remember the first church I was the pastor of, the piano player didn't know a whole lot of songs, but they also didn't have a song leader person. So the pianist would play on the piano, and I would have to lead the singing. And I got to tell you, it was ugly. There's a reason they don't let me on the stage when the band is playing. But these songs became significant things for us, right? I mean, they became milestones, and it's because when these songs were written, and I no disrespect to any of the current songs. Like I said, I'm a contemporary worship guy at heart. I was bawling my eyes out while we were singing Brandon Lake's Gratitude song last night, and that little kid's hands were in the air. That was such a special moment for me, okay? No disrespect to current music. It's just that when you start to realize why some of these songs were written and the words that they say, it gives us a perspective on life that may be a little bit more wholesome than what we look at today. And this song we just sang a moment ago, Take My Life and Let It Be. It's really powerful to think about why that song was put together. I just want to give you some context for this for a minute before I talk about the rest of our time together today, or spend the rest of our time together today. So it was written by a woman named Frances Havergale in 1874. And Frances had grown up a Jesus follower. In fact, she was the daughter of a preacher. She was a preacher's kid, right, a PK. And she found herself just so overwhelmed with God's grace and mercy in her own life, and she saw her dad had moved from rectory to rectory in the 1800s, kind of being placed at different churches, so she'd grown up in and around the church her whole life, and she'd become kind of numb to it, which, can I just be honest with you, many of us as Jesus followers, it happens to us sometimes. We get in our routine, and we go to church, we pick up our Bible, we sing the songs, we go back to work on Monday, and then we just kind of relegate Jesus to our Sunday thing, right? And maybe if you're a really good Jesus follower, a Sunday and a Wednesday thing. And so she'd fallen into that rut. And she found herself at one particular time gathered with 10 of her friends, and she realized that about 8 of the 10 friends she was with, they weren't Jesus followers. And so she knew she was going to be spending the whole weekend with them, and so she'd sat down and she'd really written almost like a Sunday school lesson in her mind about like all the theology she was going to give them and all of the doctrine stuff she was going to share, and she was going to have a very logical, laid out, particular argument for all of her friends. And she started that way on the first night and got nowhere. And so that evening, on the first night, the Friday night, she gathers and she goes back to her room, and she's really frustrated. And she can't figure out why it is that she just can't seem to reason her friends over to a relationship with Jesus. And as she's sitting there and praying, she came to realize that that's not really what works for her either. And even though she'd grown up and she knew all the doctrine and she knew all the things to do and she knew all the things to say to be a good church person, really in her heart, she was challenging herself. She was trying to figure out what it meant for her to follow Jesus. And as she sat down and prayed about this and thought about it and like, how do I move from knowing what I know to actually living it out, she, in her journal, penned the words, "Take my life and let it be ever consecrated to thee." This incredible song. And there's all these refrains about take my hands and take my heart and take my feet and take all of me, God. All of me is yours. You gave it to me. And out of this moment of realizing what God had done for her and all of this gratitude she felt for the mercy she'd been given, she penned this hymn. And the next day, she decided to share that story, her story, and that song, that poem, with her friends and led all of them to Jesus. So one of the things that happens to us, I don't know why this happens, and I know that not everybody in this room is a Jesus follower, and so like if you're not, this is I'm going to give you a kind of a lens, but which as an outsider to kind of look in on one of the temptations that hits us in the heart, is we just kind of normalize this thing, right? Like we have our moments, and look, we had such an incredible moment last week with the hymn, "It Is Well With My Soul," and so many of y'all made commitments, and like I'm telling you, it was one of the top 5 moments of ministry for me. Last Sunday was absolutely incredible. And one of the really big temptations for us as Jesus followers is to experience those moments and then just kind of go back to life as normal. But, as I said at the very beginning of this, perspective is really important. And how we see will determine what we do. And I don't know why it's so tempting for our perspective of Jesus to fade, but it does. And the antidote, according to Frances Havergale, and according to my mentor and according to my own personal walk with Jesus myself, the antidote is gratitude. It's gratitude. Coming to a perspective or coming to a position that everything that I have actually was a gift from God. The relationships that I get to have with you, the fact that I get to stand on the stage today, the fact that even though I was exhausted, I got to spend the entire day at Outback yesterday and see life change that happened. None of that would have happened if God hadn't been working in my life and gifted me the opportunities that He laid at my feet and opened the doors that He opened for me. And yeah, look, I can argue, okay, I'm not trying to sound arrogant, but I'm a fairly talented guy, and I'm okay at what I do. But the truth is, none of those things would have happened, even with the gifts that I have, if it hadn't been for God giving me the opportunity in the first place. And I literally look at my life that way on a daily basis. I think about that daily. And it does 2 things for me personally. 1, it keeps me humble, which is a really important thing for me. But 2, it actually shifts the way I'm going to look at every circumstance I experience in my life. Because some stuff is broken, right? Some things are broken. Some circumstances and situations and relationships and things that have happened to me, they have been broken. And if all I could think about was the broken things, and all I could dwell on was the broken stuff, it would be really easy for me to sit there. It's a human nature thing for us to just kind of sit and talk about the scarcity of our lives and the things we wish we had. And don't get me wrong, let's just okay, elephant in the room. With the economy the way that it is and the cost of everything being the way that it is, it's really easy for us as Americans to focus on what we don't have right now. You know, and many of us, there's government employees in this room, many of you all went for months without a paycheck. And I'm certain that was very scary for you. I'm not minimizing that at all. And me personally, having ups and downs in my own life and on all the circumstances that I face, it's so easy for me to get caught on the scarcity of the place that I find myself. But I never feel good when I do. And I never feel right when I sit there. And in fact, I don't ever walk out of those moments going, man, I'm just so glad I'm miserable today, right? I mean, nobody says that. Nobody feels that. And so when we find ourselves dwelling on the broken, the challenge for us is to shift our perspective again. And to understand that the thing that gets us out of that mode is actually a gift that God gave us. And that's to see all of the gifts and all the circumstances and all the relationships and all the stuff we have, our time, our talents, our treasure, all of those things as gifts from God. And when we decide to shift our perspective that way, something really incredible happens. Now, hold that. I'm going to tell you what that incredible thing is in just a minute. But let me tell you how all of this really works when it comes to gratitude. Gratitude doesn't begin with what you have. This is the biggest thing that was a huge shift for me. Gratitude doesn't actually start with what you have. That's how scarcity will actually wiggle its way into your life. That's how this feeling that like, oh my gosh, what am I ever going to do? And kind of feeling like the room getting tighter and tighter and tighter on you. That happens when we go, well, let me measure what I have. Gratitude doesn't start there. And I'll prove it to you. In fact, I'm not even going to make my words. I'm going to prove it to you with something the Apostle Paul said. Now, you all have heard, if you've been around this church long enough, I have bragged on the book of Romans for 4 years, almost 5 years. It'll be 5 years in February. It will be the completion of my 5th year of ministry here with you all. 5 years I've bragged on the book of Romans. And it's because it's Paul's magnum opus. And if you don't know what magnum opus is, it means it's like he poured all of his talent and all of his knowledge. He knew it was going to be the greatest thing he'd ever written. He knew it was going to be the most important thing that everyone was going to remember him by. And when he wrote this letter to the Roman church that he'd never even visited before, he knew how intelligent they were and how difficult their life had been. And he poured everything he could into the writing of that letter, the letter to the church of the Romans. And I want to summarize it for you for just a minute. And look, I'm taking a bunch of chapters and squeezing them down, okay? This is not count. You have to read the book, okay? This is why you should read your Bibles. But I'm going to give you a summary really fast, all right? So the first 11 chapters of the book of Romans are all about doctrine, right? It's all about the stuff. And what has God done specifically, like the foundations of our theology, the mercies of God and where those mercies have come from, definitions around all of those mercies. He explains salvation in a really cool, incredible way. Like, you got to read this. It's just so great. And then, this whole first section of the book is all doctrine. It's all theology. It's all head stuff. It's all of the rational argument about why you should follow Jesus. And he ends it. This is so cool. This is how you know that he's made a transition. So in the 11th chapter of Romans, Paul writes a hymn. It's so cool. It doesn't rhyme in English, and the way he puts it together, the poetry in the original Koine Greek, it's kind of hard to follow, but he puts together these incredible kind of triplets. And if you can, I don't know how many people read Greek, but go check it out sometime and at least read the words out loud. It's going to sound cool if you don't know what it says. I'm going to read you the English in just a minute, but he writes this as a way to kind of summarize everything he's come to know about God. And here's what it is. I'm going to read to you starting in the 33rd verse. Oh, the depth of the riches, the wisdom and knowledge of God. He's completely overwhelmed by everything he's learned about the head knowledge of God, right? And how unsearchable his judgments and his paths are beyond tracing out. He's overwhelmed with all of the stuff, right? Who has known the mind of the Lord, or who has been his counselor, right? God has all the knowledge and he has all authority, and there's no one that's above him, and I've come to realize this, Paul says. Then he says, who has ever given to God that God should repay them, right? Who's got anything they could give to God that God didn't already have? Who's got anything that they could go, hey, God, I bet you've never seen this before. God, I created it, sorry, all the things, right? The full universe under my footstool, God says. For from him and through him and for him are all things. To him be the glory forever. Amen. And then, starting in the 12th chapter, the 12th to the 16th chapter, is everything you're supposed to do about it. Right? It's the discipleship section. It's how we should live and the response to those great mercies of God and our ethical applications. Okay, if this is God's way of looking at life, how am I supposed to live it practically? Right? And then life change, what it looks like for our lives to be transformed by this amazing knowledge and amazing wisdom. What are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to live in light of what we've learned? And the really cool thing is right smack dab in the middle of these two sections of Romans is this little Greek phrase, un, right? Un. And un means therefore. It's translated in English as therefore. Now look, I don't do a lot of this Greek stuff because I know I'm the only one that thinks it's cool, okay? But humor me for another 30 seconds and I swear to you I'll quit, okay? Promise, I promise. Scout's honor, I'll quit. Just humor me for 30 seconds. Whenever you see the word therefore in any of Paul's writings, he has made a very logical argument. Like if you go to Ephesians, he does this. If you go to Galatians, he does this. He'll spend several chapters making a really cool, logical argument that you can't argue with. And then he'll say, therefore, since I'm right, here's what you should do, right? I'm right, you know it, therefore do this. And in Romans, this is the most important un in all of Scripture. This is actually the most important therefore that Paul ever wrote. And I would argue the most significant un in all of the New Testament. The most significant therefore ever written by a New Testament author is found right here in chapter 12, verse 1. Because this is Paul's way of saying, okay, look, you know who God is. Now you know who God is. Now you know what he's done. Now you know what his mercies are. Now you know what his salvation has done for you. Now you know the mess you were in and how God got you out of it. So here's what you need to do. And I don't know about you, but as a Jesus follower, when somebody smarter and more faithful than me says, here's what you should do, my ears perk up. My ears perk up. So what does Paul say that we should do? Therefore, he says, therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, and this word urge that he uses, the phrase that he picks out, is actually like not just like do this, he's begging them. Like this is literally like, imagine Paul getting down on his hands and knees and going, I'm begging you, in light of what I just told you, I'm begging you to live this way. Brothers and sisters is very familial too. It means like, it literally means those of us from the same womb, that we've all been born together into this new life. This new life that we now have we're not living the old life. We have a new perspective. We have a new way of looking at things, right? Therefore, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, right? In view of the fact that God looked into your life and said, you are in a helpless state, and I don't want to leave you there. And again, if you're not a Jesus follower, you might not understand the significance of this yet. So for just a few seconds, those of you that have already decided that Jesus is who he says he is, you know what you've been bought out of. You know what your life was attached to before Jesus. And if you read the first 11 chapters of Romans, you know how dire your situation was. And so Paul says, look, in view of what you know God has done, in view of God's mercy, offer yourselves. This is so incredible. I'm urging you, in view of God's mercy, to offer yourselves, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice. This is actually, the sacrificial language is actually attached to the way they used to go to the temple service. And what he's mean is like, there's a couple of things that are happening here that are all of us theological nerds will pick up on. Paul was really trying to make sure that people understood that the whole monastic way of just saying, I'm going to follow Jesus and run off here and hide by myself for the rest of my life doesn't work. That all of us, our soul, our spirit, our body, every part of us, our decision-making process, our relationships, everything we have, all of us, we give it to God. We offer it like freely. Then we go like this with all of us back to God in view of what he's already done. Offer it as a living sacrifice. That in our mannerisms, in the decisions we make, and in the way we talk to each other, we're gonna be a living embodiment of someone who understands the mercies of God, right? And for the record, mercies, it automatically kind of insinuates a gift, right? It automatically insinuates like you were in a position that was helpless, And God stepped in to intervene in a way that only he could. And so you are living a life that you shouldn't be able to have. And everything you have in it was already a gift to you in the first place. So why not give it back, Paul says. In view of what God has already done, why are you still holding on to stuff? Why are you still controlled by your circumstances? Why are you still gripping the wheel like this? I urge you, offer your bodies, all of yourself, as a living sacrifice. And this is so good. Holy and pleasing to God. In other words, when you do this, this is what God is actually wanting from you. And it's not that he needs it. You're not giving God something he doesn't have. That God is saying, like, look, let me step in. It pleases God so much to look down on our lives and to see us go, God, I don't know how, but you do. God, everything I have is yours anyway. God, I surrender. I've told this story before, but the words that set me free when I decided to realize, come back to the faith, accept my call to ministry, I said, God, I give up, you win. You win. and the freedom that I felt in that moment, I can't even explain the feeling that happened inside of me when that happened. God, you win. And look, I'm not trying to make it like God was stomping me into the ground. I don't mean that. It was more like God was trying to show me so clearly that me being in control was a terrible idea. And me making all the decisions and me gripping the wheel of my life just like this, as hard as I could with white-knuckled fists, was not helping me. And God knew better. God knew better about my finances. God knew better about my relationships. God knew better about my career. God knew better about my education. All of those things. God knew better about all the things. And every time I was fighting him to turn in the opposite direction, I was just causing myself more pain. They say, look, it's so holy and pleasing to God when you offer yourself as a living sacrifice. And then he finishes it by saying this phrase, this, just so you know, this is true and proper worship. I told you from the very beginning that the key phrase of this whole series is that gratitude is worship, rebellion wrapped in worship, right? Gratitude is rebellion wrapped in worship. It's this idea that it's so countercultural. In the middle of what we could assume would be a time of scarcity, it's so countercultural to stand in the moment where we go, well, gosh, I got a whole list of things I wish I had. It's so countercultural to go, gosh, I'm so grateful for what I have. It's rebellion. This is true and proper worship, to just kind of hand yourself over to God and say, God, you win. God, you understand me better. You understand life better. You understand, this is why you have boundaries on my life. This is why you say things are out of bounds. And gosh, I would love to step over there. I'd love to be out of bounds. That being over here would be so much better, I think, for me. But you're saying it's not, and I trust you. Let me put this to you a different way if this hasn't worked for you yet. If the mercies of God are true, then surrender isn't as extreme as we make it sound. If we really believe what we say we believe about our lives being attached to nothing, like that sin had made our situation helpless, and then there was no way for us to get out of it, and that God, knowing that, didn't go, okay, well, time to squash him like a bug. Instead, he said, let me give you Jesus to die for you, to set you free, so that I will pay the cost you can't afford to pay. That's the mercy and the grace of God. And if that's true, then surrender isn't as extreme as we make it out to be. I've been in ministry now for over 20 years, and throughout that time I've done a lot of weddings, a lot of them. And I'm going to let you in on a secret that's not going to be a secret once it's on camera, right? Weddings make me more nervous than anything else that I do. Anything. Because I think about being that guy standing up here and I'm holding the book, and then I say something stupid and it's on the wedding video for like the rest of their lives. And like all they remember is not the beautiful bride's dress and how wonderful everybody looked, but how stupid I looked, right? I don't know why. It's an insecurity I can't get over. But one of the things I've realized is over the past probably 5 or 6 years, the traditional vows, right, to have and to hold till this day forward, that whole line that used to be in there about obey is gone. We have dropped the whole obey thing from all of our vows and everything that we do because it sounds like surrender, and we don't like that, right? When we can maintain what we think is a modicum of control over our lives, it makes us be able to sleep better at night, so we think. But if our situation was really as helpless, like look, back to you. If your situation was as helpless as we really hear that it is from what Paul says, and in the first 11 chapters of Romans, he makes it so clear how helpless we really were. If that's the case, and he bought you out of that, then is trusting him with your life that extreme of a thing? Is it really as crazy as it sounds to go, God, you love me unconditionally, and yeah, I would love to make different decisions and live a different way and have a different type of doing things, but you love me unconditionally, therefore I'm going to trust you. And by trusting you, I'm going to go like this. Is that really that extreme? How you see your life will determine how you steward your life. And if you see yourself as someone who's, again, I'm in control and I'm making the rules and I'm doing the things, if that's the way you see your relationships and your finances and your career and your education, then you're always going to be fighting against the current of God going, I know something better for you. I have just a little bit better way for you to do this. And it's always going to feel like you're debating, and there's this tug of war in your heart constantly between what you think God would have you do and what you really want to do. How you see your life will determine how you steward your life. And as someone who's lived the wrong way for a while in my own life, I can say this next thing with actually experiential confidence. How you steward what you have will determine your happiness and your capacity. Trust me. How you steward what you have will determine your happiness and your capacity. So, let me put these two thoughts together for you for a minute. If you find yourself in a place where you're like, oh my gosh, I feel like I have nothing, and I feel like I got to fight, and we got to get more, and I'm going to have to pick up a third job or a fourth job, and you've kind of like battled yourself into a corner financially, you've battled yourself into a corner in your career, you've battled yourself into a corner in your relationship, and you're like, gosh, our marriage is not really what I wanted it to be, and I've got to get control of this thing, and I hear this so many times with couples. They come and sit with me, and one of them feels like they got to keep their thumb on the other. And if they don't keep their thumb on the other, then all heck's going to break loose in their home. And I'm like, well, what would it look like to let God do that? And you just kind of go like this. And it's the most terrifying thought in the world, right? Because you're like, I've worked really hard to get him or her in that corner, right? I've worked really hard to push them there, to get them where I need them to be. And if I take my foot off the gas, you don't know what's going to happen. But you're not happy doing that. And they're not happy experiencing that. How you steward what you have will determine your happiness and capacity. And at least according to Francis Havergale and my own personal experience and the Apostle Paul, you're not the best person to steward that stuff. God is. I don't mean any disrespect. You all are probably 10 times smarter than me and a million times more successful than me. But at least according to all of those people, that doesn't really matter in the way that life actually works. And when you decide to go like this to God and say, look, you can have my wallet, you can have my career, you can have my marriage, you can have my relationship with my kids, you can have my talent, you can have my time, you can steward my calendar, you can have it all. Life somehow, some way, God takes all of that stuff, just like Jesus multiplying the fish and the bread from the little kid's lunchbox when he fed 5,000 people with it, and he suddenly somehow adds capacity. And you find yourself filled with more happiness or joy if that word happiness really bothers you. And for some reason, the thing that makes this possible, the constant kind of force that keeps us in this mode of thinking, like this idea of like, God, you win and the surrender, is actually gratitude. Gratitude is the catalyst for surrender. Because, again, as I've lived this myself, for me personally, the hardest thing that I ultimately had to surrender was my wallet. That was like the last thing that I had to let go of. And I know, if you're new to church, and here you go, the pastor's talking about money again, that's not what I'm doing, I promise. I'm just talking about my own perspective. For me, it was so hard to just relinquish control of my finances. I'm making this money, and I've worked hard, and we don't have a lot, and I need to be careful, and I'll give away a little bit. Like I'll put a little bit in the plate, like the cash that I have in my pocket, I'm going to do that. But somehow, I don't make any more money now than I ever have, but somehow when I started going, God, you win, and I'm going to start at the top. I'm going to give first, I'm going to save second, and then I'm going to live on the rest. I have more than I ever thought I could, and I'm giving away more than I ever thought that I could. And somehow I ended up with capacity and happiness from the same amount of junk that I had to begin with. Now you explain that to me if it's not something that happens in the kingdom. Let me show you how this works. All right, here's some bridges. Like if you're struggling with this, here's some bridges that'll get you from gratitude to generosity. That'll get you to go like this: from gratitude to surrender, from gratitude to generosity, from gratitude to going, okay, you win. Number one, gratitude grounds you, right? By going, God, everything I have is yours anyway. Everything I have is yours anyway. The life, the breath in my lungs, the literal ground that I'm standing on only exists because you spoke it into existence. When you count your blessings, you stop chasing what you don't have. Because all of a sudden it doesn't matter as much anymore. You realize, well, God gave me all this stuff too, and if he wants me to have something else, he'll give it to me. And if he doesn't, I'm good. It's so freeing. Then gratitude actually reframes scarcity. It reframes scarcity for you, because then you're like, well, am I really missing that much? Do I really not have as much as I thought I did? Right? It reminds you that God is your source. Back up for me. It reminds you that God is the source, not your salary, not your talent, not your calendar, not your time. God gave you all that stuff. And oh my gosh, I got to tell you, it is so freeing to live in a world like that. And I know you're thinking in your brain, well, that's just crazy. No one lives like that. You can't do a family like that. Yes, they do. And yes, you can. I have 4 kids and a wife and a house and a mortgage and all the other stuff, okay? But I don't have to live in this mindset that I'm terrified all the time. And look, I can guarantee you, I'm probably not making more money than most of you all that are sitting in this room. I don't mean that like you got to give me a raise. I'm really good. The point is, I just stopped saying I have to have. And it's so freeing to go, God, whatever I have is yours anyway. You gave it to me. If you want me to have something else, it's awesome. If not, I'm good. So freeing. And I know, when everything costs more, generosity reminds you what's truly priceless, okay? I know, everything costs more right now, and like, it's so easy for me to stand up here and say, like, you should go like this. And like, I'm not arguing today that everybody should start giving more money than they ever have before. But I can tell you that if you decide to relinquish control of everything you have, being generous with your time and your talents and your treasure, you're going to realize what actually is priceless, what actually matters in your life. When you give God more of your time, you give God more of yourself, you give God more of your wallet, you're reminded what actually matters. And then finally, this is where it happens. Gratitude then fuels generosity. When your heart is full, your hands naturally open. Let me summarize it, then I'll quit, okay? Gratitude reframes what you have. Generosity reframes what you give. Gratitude reframes what you have. It gives you a better perspective on things. And then generosity reframes what you give. And according to the Apostle Paul, Jesus' follower generosity is whole life surrender. Right? Don't remember? Romans 12, verse 1. This is your true and proper worship. This is what it looks like, Paul says. And what's incredible to me, if I could just say this, okay? The Apostle Paul, think about this for a second, okay? The Apostle Paul, he grew up and he talks about this in other letters. He grew up in a wealthy family. He grew up in a very respected family. He went to a respected school. He was on track to move into what the best way to describe is more like politics for us. He was on a fast track to be popular and have power and authority, and everybody looked at him. He was there when Stephen was martyred, and everyone was looking to him like Paul's the next guy in this great religion that we're setting up. He's going to be the reformer. He's going to be awesome. And Paul, when he was confronted with Jesus, do you realize this? When Jesus showed up and goes, Paul, what are you doing? He literally went like this. Do you realize that? Like, I know that there's so many words that are recorded about it in the book of Acts, but in the simplest form of what Paul did, he goes, God, you win. You can have my life. You can have my career. You can have my power. You can have my family. You win. And then he became what I would argue is the greatest church planter in history. He did more and accomplished more and went more places and did more things to spread the gospel. We exist today as a church because of the work the Apostle Paul did when he handed his life over to God. Now, one more thing. This is it. You may be thinking to yourself, the only way for you to give yourself over to God is to go full-time ministry and empty your wallet and no. You can follow Jesus right where you are. You just have to decide that he knows better than you do. There was a prayer that I was taught when I was a kid, and I've simplified it for you all. I'm going to read this to you. I'm going to ask you to think about it, okay? This is going to be a commitment moment. Then I'll pray and we can go home. John Wesley wrote this prayer he called his covenant prayer. And he made his church read it every year at the beginning of the year. And it was his way of, like total surrender of our lives. And his is really long. I would encourage you to go check it out. I know some people I went to seminary with used to pin it on their glass. It's kind of confrontational for me and it's hard. And so I don't like put it on my mirror when I wake up in the morning, but I do think about this all the time. And so if you're wondering, what does a step like this look like? How do I even begin? I would encourage you to think about the words of this prayer. I'm going to read it out loud once. And then I'll read it out loud again, and then I'll pray over you, and I'll leave it up on the screen. And if you decide this is where you want to be, you just stay right where you're at. Spotify music come on, the lights come up, you just pray right where you are. If this is your time to go, God, you win, then don't miss it. This is the words. Heavenly Father, I surrender myself to you. My hands, my feet, my time, my wallet, my thoughts and desires, my hopes and my dreams, my talent and opportunities. I surrender all. Thy will be done through me today. Heavenly Father, I surrender myself to you. My hands, my feet, my time, my wallet, my thoughts and desires, my hopes and my dreams, my talent and my opportunities. I surrender all. Thy will be done through me today. Let me pray for you. Heavenly Father, there's something in us as human beings that just feels so nervous about praying words like this. And yet, we know your mercies are good. And we know your life is true. And we know you are who you say you are. And God, I know that in this room, there's people that don't believe those things yet. And I just pray that something I said today will spark in them a curiosity about your goodness. And that through that curiosity, you might show them, just rain on them the mercy and grace that all the rest of us have already experienced. But for those of us that are following you, but we're still holding you at arm's length, God, I just pray that we will release our hands today, that we will trust you in all of our circumstances and all of our decisions. We will trust you because you know what's best for us, better than we do. You have all the wisdom, you have all the knowledge, you have all the authority, and you are good, and you love us, and your steadfast love endures forever and ever and ever. So God, open our hands today. Help us to surrender to you and to know that you know what we should do and how we should do it. We love you and we trust you and we ask it in Jesus' name. And all God's people said, amen.